welcome everyone. Today I'd like to break down the different phases of project management. I'll be covering a series of videos from initiation all the way to closing a project so that you understand what exactly you need to know in all those steps. I figured this video would be super important for those who are newer to project management or just need a refresher course as to what exactly a project entails. So what exactly is initiation? Initiation is the starting of a project, which usually is formally approved through some type of contracting. The contract is the formal document that gives the project manager the authority to begin the project, to lead a team, and to work with the client in order to accomplish the goals in the agreement. This is typically done through an MSA, a master service agreement, or an SOW, which is a statement of work. It's essentially an additional piece of documentation that is a legal contract that binds the client to carry out the services and to carry out the agreement in which your company's offering. Now, the contract is one of the most important pieces in terms of project management work because that's what you'll be referring back to and utilizing, whether it's pushing back on scope creep or just making sure that you're delivering everything that's mentioned in the signed agreement. During this time period, the sales team will likely be one of your best partners as you navigate through the initiation phase. There is usually some type of sales documentation or handoff process in which the sales team hands off the contract to the project manager and then passes on that knowledge so the project manager can start taking and leading these sessions. Some examples of information that are really important to identify at this time period are: who are the executive stakeholders? Who are the project team members? What is the scope? How is the client? How is the relationship? What's the analysis? After that initial sales and contracting handoff process, the project manager should keep the sales team member right by their hip. After reviewing the contract, identifying some of the project team members, and working with functional managers to make sure that those team members have the bandwidth to work on the project, as the project manager, you will then host one of your first sessions and meetings with the client. During the first meeting, this is oftentimes called the strategy call. It's really important that your sales counterpart attends this call just because they already have that established relationship and they have that built up rapport already. So project-wise, there are a couple really important key factors that you'll typically discuss during your first meeting. The project manager will likely create the decks that you'll be reviewing during that client call. Oftentimes, the slides will include introductions, introducing both teams, an overview of your organization to any stakeholders who may not be familiar, the project timelines and the estimated deliverables, the scope, any logistics in terms of how teams will meet and share information, and then there will be a breakdown of action items and then next steps as well. During the strategy call, you typically have the executive stakeholders and the ones who initially sign the contract. Typically, this is a lot smaller of a meeting that you'll have throughout the implementation lifecycle, and it's a great way to introduce yourself and to make yourself known as the lead for the project. So in addition to reviewing over the deck and the materials that you've already prepared for, a big part of that call is actually a huge collaborative discussion. So aside from reviewing over the contract and information, you're also trying to better understand what are the client's needs. What are their needs and what are the most pressing areas where your organization can provide the most support that may not be reflected or shown in any previous documentation? This is a huge tip that every project manager should use when initiating a project. Try to identify an executive champion or a champion stakeholder. This individual is someone on the client team who can express the positive and great benefits from the partnership with your organization. If your executive sponsor is engaged and bought into the mission and to your organization, it makes the entire partnership that much more of a collaborative experience, which is exactly what you want. So now you've had your initial strategy call, you've introduced yourself to your client counterparts. The next step is to regroup and to better understand what are any updates or changes that the client may have mentioned that may not be in the contract. During this process, it's when you will work with your sales teams and your legal team as well to make any amendments and to write any of those changes down in your CRM or in your logs. So you've done a great job with your strategy call. Typically after this call, you'll have another one with a larger audience called a kickoff call. During the kickoff call, this is when you're looping in the wider audience of stakeholders. So this includes your executive stakeholders, in addition to any members who will be impacted by the project. An example of which is during a software implementation, during the strategy call, you'll have typically the CIO, Chief Information Officer, or the Chief Technology Officer, who likely is maybe one of the stakeholders who signed the contract, having them bought in addition to any executives on the IT team. These will all be the necessary stakeholders. During the kickoff call, for example, during a software implementation, you will likely have your executive IT counterparts, in addition to any end users who will be impacted by the software. So for example, in the software implementation, if your end users are ultimately accountants who will utilize this financial platform, you'll want to make sure that most of the end users are invited to this call so that they're more familiar with what the platform and the program are, and they'll be the ones who will actually be providing feedback and testing to make sure that the software is appropriate for their needs. That's to say, socialization is one of the most important parts of any project. If the end users and if the teams that you're working with do not know who you are and do not know what products you're helping to develop or to push out, there will be a huge pushback and things can get pretty messy. Pro tip number 2. Utilize the kickoff call to start identifying who the main stakeholders are who you'll be working with throughout the project. Whether it's directors of the IT team if you're implementing software, or the end users and managers of different departments within the software organization. Getting the names, the roles of your stakeholders, and any contact information is very helpful because after the initiation phase, you'll be able to directly contact these stakeholders and work with them, and that won't be a roadblock in terms of knowing and finding the right contacts. So that concludes a high-level overview of the initiation phase of implementation and project management. During this time period, there's typically a lot of investigation and research that's happening that the project manager does behind the scene. During that sales handoff, when the contract is passed over to the project manager's responsibility is to review the contract and to make sure that they understand what the scope and what the deliverables are. Ultimately, this contract will be your one-stop shop for designing most of your decks during the first initial calls and making sure that you're up to speed on what the client's needs are. Thanks for watching. Comment below your learned lessons from your experience working in the initiation phase of a project, and if you have any questions down below. We'll catch you all in the next video.